To begin our sharing today concerning the recovery curriculum, focusing on the fifth lever of space, some thoughts from Rilke's writings concerning space. It seems to me that almost all our sadnesses are moments of tension, which we feel as paralysis because we no longer hear our astonished emotions living. Because we are alone with the unfamiliar presence that has entered us, because everything we trust and are used to is for a moment taken away from us, because we stand in the midst of a transition where we cannot remain standing. That is why the sadness passes. The new presence inside us, the presence that has been added, has entered our hearts, has gone into its innermost chamber and is no longer even there, is already in our bloodstream. And we don't know what it was. We could easily be made to believe that nothing happened. And yet we have changed. As a house that a guest has entered changes. We can't say who has come. Perhaps we will never know. But many signs indicate that the future enters us in this way in order to be transformed in us long before it happens. And that is why it is so important to be solitary and attentive when one is sad. Because a seemingly uneventful and motionless moment, when our future steps into us, is so much closer to life than that other loud and accidental point of time when it happens to us as if from outside. Ideas there from Rainer Maria Rilke's We Move in Infinite Space. My name is Robbie Chavez, Head of Services at RBE Psychological Services, your mental health pathfinder. Together with you this morning, we will be thinking about the last lever in Carpenter and Carpenter's The Recovery Curriculum. The recovery curriculum is summarily defined as a curriculum of loss and life. It is one that, according to many scholars and experts and mental health professionals, such as Dr. Tina Ray, is necessary when we open our spaces to children and learners. Because of the events of the COVID-19 pandemic, all the consequences it has brought into the academic lives of learners, it is important that we understand and that we support and help them by making use of the 5 levers. The 4 of relationships, community, transparent curriculum, we've already talked about in the previous shares. Today, we shall focus on the 5th and last lever, the lever of space. Carpenter and Carpenter defines space as a lever in the recovery curriculum. I quote, to be, to rediscover self, and to find voice on learning issues. They continue to write, it is only natural that we all work at an incredible pace to make sure this group of learners, i.e. those who have been affected by the COVID-19 crisis, are not disadvantaged against their peers, providing opportunity and exploration alongside the intensity of our expectations. When we speak about spaces in learning, we often are directed towards 2 types. The inner space, that is the psychological space of the learner, and the outer space of learners. When we speak about the classroom, the educators and the teachers, the physical facility of the school campus, the implements or materials, tools, and equipment that are used for learning, this is to speak about the outer space. These things, these persons, situations, places, environments can be considered as parts of the outer space. More importantly, however, is the inner space of our learners. One thing that holds these inner and outer spaces together is the amount of change or alteration that they have been subjected to because of the global health crisis. Experts have talked about altered environments. Everything has been touched by the health crisis and has changed as a result. One such altered environment is our teaching. One such altered environment is our learning. In an article entitled Altered Environments, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, I put forward 3 important points that, keeping to Carpenter and Carpenter's ideas concerning the space of learners, both inner and outer, we can do as educators to help them and support them during this difficult time. We've provided similar activities. We've shared similar programs that are in line with the lever of relationships, the lever of community, transparent curriculum, and metacognition. These are levers 1 to 4. These are not arranged in any order, of course. To say that these are levers in the recovery curriculum is to remind ourselves that these are equally important aspects or dimensions of the curriculum of loss and life that our learners will have to learn if we are continue educating ourselves, if we are to continue learning, if we are to continue teaching. In that article concerning pedagogy or teaching as an altered environment, 3 suggestions were raised, and these ideas were based on the works of Paulo Freire, Erich Fromm, and my own, among others. The 3 suggestions are for us to first join in order to help and support our learners in these altered environments, navigate, manage these changed environments. To give us concrete examples, I look to the article of Karina Smith, published online on the 12th of May, 2020. Karina Smith is Vice Principal at Broad Oak Academy in Weston Super. She has been a senior leader for 6 years, head of English for 5 years, and has been teaching for 11 years. She considers it her advocacy to champion students and find innovative solutions to problems. In an article entitled Giving Children a Voice in the Post-Pandemic World, this was the first part of her writing, she gives examples of these altered environments of learning and teaching. She wrote, and I quote, "Now this place has gone, and when students return to it, it will be very different. The way they enter the building will change, as will the micro routines and interactions they once enjoyed at the start of each day. How they interact with their peers will change. They won't interact without adults present. How they eat and enjoy leisure activities at school will change. These will be restricted and altered. How they learn and are taught will change." These sweeping changes encourage us to join in. And joining in means contributing to the conversation. It means, as Fromm would tell us, to provide our own thoughts and our own feelings concerning these altered environments or these changed spaces. Joining in with our learners will mean that we're not only there to enforce or talk about safety protocols, but that we're also present in order to support them in navigating and managing these changed or these altered spaces. Our presence also goes back to supporting them in terms of helping them with the other four levers that we've discussed to emphasize relationship, to make sure that we make the necessary adjustments to make the curriculum not only a recovery curriculum, but also a transparent one. Our presence will also be a presence that hopefully inspires and promotes metacognition, to think about thinking. The second suggestion from the article that I wrote is very similar to what we heard from Karina Smith, and this is to lift our own voices. Joining in is not only a matter of being physically present or in this world of virtual engagements present online with our learners. It also means that we make sure that our assertiveness brings a sense of safety, a sense of encouragement and confidence to our learners that they can continue learning despite the difficulties of this time. Lifting up our voices will mean that we engage and join in critical and liberating dialogues, which, of course, as Freire points out in page 65 of his book, The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, presupposes action. This must be carried on with the oppressed at whatever the stage of their struggle for liberation. We can think of our context now as a context of oppression. At the moment, we all feel very hemmed in. We all feel very restricted and limited. Learners and teachers alike can't move the way we used to. We can't do things, we can't learn and do our reports and submit our assignments and engage in projects and listen to lectures and do experiments in laboratories the way we used to. We feel restricted. Not having those face-to-face classes is, of course, one of the more important changes that have occurred. Some students find it very difficult dealing with this huge change. And lifting up our voices means to have action that is embedded and founded on critical and liberating dialogue. It is first important to talk about things before acting on them. Mindful action is dependent on mindful talking, mindful relating, mindful communicating. The last suggestion in that article, which I published online a year ago, I would say, would be a thought coming from Erich Fromm. And this is the rehumanization of our altered environments, the rehumanization of our spaces. Many of our spaces have become very cold and flat because of the COVID-19 crisis. It's been very difficult, for example, to create spaces as vibrant as they were pre-pandemic. This is what Karina Smith talks about in her article when she points out that when children do get back to the physical space, to the outer space of the school campus, when they enter the school building or when they go back to their learning spaces. Of course, a lot of countries have allowed children to come back to their classrooms without, of course, stopping themselves from really implementing restrictions, the same minimum public health standards that are in place in our country. That is, when they come back to these buildings, when they come back to schools, it will be changed environments or altered spaces, because the way they do their routines will change, even though they might be in face-to-face classrooms, limited as they are. There are a multitude of arrangements, of course. Some countries have allowed these classrooms to be filled up like they were before the pandemic. Others have had restrictions in place, making sure that they limit the amount of learners inside the usual spaces. So they've changed their schedules to accommodate only 20% or 30% of the class size into their classrooms. Whatever the arrangements are, the changes will be perceptible. The changes will be there to greet the learners as they come back in. Here, of course, in our own country, the government is not allowed face-to-face contact as of yet. And this means that many learners are stuck with hybrid forms of learning, blended forms of education, as they're called, a combination of virtual methodologies and modular education or modular academics. These, of course, are forms of ODLs or online distance learning procedures. They occupy many schools and universities and colleges in terms of printing out the modules and setting up the virtual spaces required for these online classes to happen. Again, whatever the form or mode of learning is, the changes are there. The alterations are clear as daylight. And it is perhaps only the strongest form of denial for any educator or for any learner to say that these changes are not apparent. They're there for everyone to see. The rehumanization of these cold spaces, it can become cold minus the warmth of a teacher, minus the warmth of an educator, minus the real contact between the child and his or her mentor. When we look at nursery or daycare spaces, for example, we have to confront ourselves with the near absurdity of having daycare students and kindergarten students work through worksheets or modules without teacher contact, without social presence, without the human and intimate contact between themselves and their daycare teacher or their kindergarten teacher. As such, these learning spaces can be very cold. And so the suggestion of Erich Fromm to rehumanize these spaces brings love into the learning space. It reminds us that even in a modular learning, even in blended forms of education, it is possible to show this love, to show this caring, and to show this warmth. According to Erich Fromm, it is necessary that in the face of these oppressive forces, in the face of the difficulties of limited spaces, learning spaces during this time, that we continue to show our warmth, to show our caring. Perhaps as teachers and educators of Ibabaw Estancia Elementary School or St. Louis School of Don Bosco or Mandaue Christian School, it is important for us to ask, how can I make that happen online? How can I show my warmth and my intimacy when I am with students online? Much of it will probably be the same strategies, the same techniques, the same ways of showing love and caring when we were with our learners inside their classrooms or inside our classrooms would probably carry through or apply in the virtual spaces that we occupy during this time. Greeting them, asking them questions such as, how are you? Or how has your day been like? How has your week been like? Will certainly be very helpful and will go a long way to rehumanize and to bring love and caring into these learning spaces. It would be, of course, a bit different when we look at modular learning, and perhaps sticky notes, short notes that we can write to our students, and that we stick onto their modules as they get delivered to their houses or as they come to the school campus. Well, not them, but their parents come to the school campuses and pick them up. These short notes, asking them how they are, providing messages of hope and encouragement or affirmation, are certainly helpful tidbits that can, in the words of Erich Fromm, rehumanize these cold and barren, altered environments that we all occupy at the moment. Karina Smith, in the article I referenced earlier, also provides three P's, which can be important in addressing these altered environments, or to be more exact, addressing our feelings, the feelings of our learners, and their learning process inside or within these learning spaces. Not just their reactions to the outer space, not just their reactions to teacher prompts or visual aids or the pages of their module. That's all outer space. But more importantly, in the recovery curriculum, the inner space. What Rilke looks into as that important transition that we all have to make. In our opening, reading from Rilke's We Move in Infinite Space, he talks about what happens when we transition between spaces, when we move between spaces. What can happen when we move from the outer space, which has changed so much because of these alternative study arrangements, to our inner spaces, one that is, as presumed by the recovery curriculum and as observed by many of us, filled with anxiety and worry and stress. When we go back to the inner space of our learners and ask ourselves, how might they be feeling deep down inside when they're beginning their classes, when we are beginning the semester, or when we're opening the school year? It's important to consider that inner space. And besides joining in, besides voicing out and rehumanizing these spaces, there are also the three P's from Vice Principal Smith. And she writes, and I quote, "We must provoke, make speaking up a necessity because the students find something interesting, funny. They can't help but give their thoughts, or they feel the need to contribute because speaking up matters." The next P is the P of promotion, and the last, the P of providing. In our last few minutes, or last 9 minutes of this discussion or this share, we explore these three P's and we ask ourselves what might be things that we can do, things that we can say in class, whether these are virtual classes or online classes or limited face-to-face classes or modular learning. What can we do or say that can provoke, that can help students speak up? We turn to our clinic manager for his thoughts concerning this first P of provoking, and we provide at least one activity, at least one thing that we can say or one thing we can do when we find ourselves with learners. Another important setup, another important consequence of the altered environment of learning spaces is, of course, the tutoring that happens at home. Many parents have bewailed, but have also accepted the importance of having to guide their learners through their academics or through their study. So never have we seen a time when parents have become, sometimes for many parents, unwillingly, they have unwillingly become their children's tutors again. So we have never before seen a time like this when parents and students, their children who are students in schools, are almost forced and demanded to work together on a module, for example. Many parents will scratch their heads, of course, not knowing what to do. Some will complain and say, I didn't even finish elementary, and now I'm finding myself guiding my high school learner, and working on things like algebraic expressions and trigonometry, which I never learned myself when I was in school. How do we provoke? Okay, how do we provoke our learners to speak up? This is especially important for Filipino learners as well, because a lot of Filipino learners have the attitude of compliance. And I believe this is also something that is uh, that prevails among many, not just students, but workers and among friends and family. We have the attitude or the approach of compliance. We'd rather not say anything, and we just follow the rules, we just follow the policies, we just follow what's on the module and get it over and done with. With this, it's important that we provoke. Provoking here is not, of course, what might be implied when we use the word commonly in conversations. To provoke, according to Smith, is to invite to speak up. It is to send the message that speaking up matters, talking about your feelings matter, that it's difficult to learn, it's difficult to complete your module, it's difficult to complete your projects or assignments unless you tell me how you feel, unless you tell me about what you're thinking, tell me about what the difficulties you're encountering are. When you tell me about how you're thinking about your thinking, the metacognitive process that we talked about yesterday. So we turn to Josh now, the clinic manager, as he might have some thoughts about if he were to be put in this situation of having to or encouraging our learners to speak up, what would he do? What would he say in order to provoke and invite learners or students to say something about their learning, to say something about their thinking?
Hello. So ang ako kay siguro when I'm tutoring ba siguro or being with the student kay siguro when he or she is answering her modules kay or even after kay magkuha lang siguro ko ginagmay nga mga open nga mga conversation like sa gi-share ganina nga mangutana kung kumusta sa balay, kumusta ang module, kumusta ang pag-answer, na ba siya wala na sabtan or na ba siya gikalibgan inana or na ba siya gustong i-share ng mga thoughts regarding sa iyahang mga natun-an o pwede ra ko makig-converse niya sa kadiyot no basin na siya gustong i-share inana. So kana siya dayon kung na siya ma-share siguro mo add lang sad ko gamay og mga questions no mga follow-up questions para maatiman gyud na ako siya ako siya ma-monitor kung nabakahay mga or is there something going on sa iyahang studying basin nakapalisod or nakapakuan niya o kana siya nakapalisod sa iyahang studies or siguro kung if he or she is doing well kay mangutana sad ko kung unsay nakapakuan niya unsay mga nakatabang niya kay para at least nasad ko'y ma-share sad sa ubang mga akong gipang monitor nga mga students mo share ko sa ilaha para sa kung unsa ang what work for some students inana so mo share ko mangutana ko unya ako sang i-share sa uban nga students nga naglisod inana unya um mo to siya siguro kung naay mga questions sa module nga nag-require og critical thinking inana kay ako siyang ipa-ask kung unsaon niya pag-relate sa iyang real life kay para at least makahuna-huna siya no kung unsaon niya pag-apply or unsaon niya pag ah, go around or siguro ba sina siya yung mga other solutions nga nahuna-hunaan aside sa mga given nga mga answers nga nadaan sa module so basin na siya other ideas no nga gusto niya i-add so siguro kana akong ipang ask niya para ma-provoke ang iyang thinking ana o nasod siya chance nga maka-express sa iyang thoughts sa iyang feelings kana siya sa
Thank you very much, Clinic Manager Joshua Cardona there, giving us suggestions on how we can provoke and invite our learners to speak up and to get carried away in this idea that speaking up matters. What your heart feels and what your mind thinks matter. The three strategies which are, I think, very important and very doable that Josh has shared also incorporates the other levers which have been discussed. That is the three strategies of engaging in open conversation, asking questions, and promoting critical thinking. All incorporate or all say something about relationships, community, transparent curriculum, and metacognition. Let's go through the three strategies again. They're not new strategies, but they're tried and tested ones. And sometimes we forget these very simple and powerful strategies. We forget to use them, thinking instead of advanced methods or advanced strategies. The first is engaging in open conversation. And I like this very much because it, as I said, integrates the power of using a relationship. Relationships, of course, that go beyond the gut level. Relationships that go beyond what is skin deep. And again, we're reminded by Carpenter and Carpenter that there is no learning without a relationship. A relationship has to be present for learning to happen. Whether this is an interpersonal relationship or an intrapersonal relationship, a deeper awareness of the self. Relationships with other people, with ourselves, and the environment are required for us to learn. If we don't relate with our environment, for example, even in solitary play, even while the toddler is playing by himself or herself, he or she is relating to his environment, isn't she? She's picking up a stone or looking at the sky or marveling at a butterfly. These are relationships too. They're relationships with the natural world. And gut level relationships, deep relationships, are marked by open conversations. We know that a person has a deep relationship with another, or a deep relationship with nature, a deep relationship with God, when he or she is capable of engaging in an open conversation with the person, with the entity, with the energy or the concept that he or she relates to. The second idea from Josh would be questions. And questions, especially when we are mindful of the kind of questions that we ask, are open invitations to respond. This is the beauty of questions, because questions always supposes or expects an answer. It expects an engagement. Of course, there are many types of questions. There are academic questions, etc. But then when we say the right questions, we get the right responses. The third strategy is one of supporting critical thinking. And this incorporates metacognition. The other two strategies from Josh also incorporates transparent curriculum, really looking at not just the subject matter, but what is going on in the inner space. Of course, this also promotes community, a connectedness with someone else. In fact, a relationship is a connection. The second P that Christina Smith talks about, or Karina Smith talks about, as helping us in navigating and managing the altered spaces or the altered environments of learning, is to promote. That is, she writes, and I quote, "We must promote. We give students the opportunity to celebrate the positive in what has happened. What do they want to keep about their new way of life at home? Just as adults will be considering what makes them tick in this new world, we must promote some of the new aspects of the children's characters that have developed at home and celebrate these." The important word I feel that captures what she means here is the word celebrate. Promoting is celebrating. And the recovery curriculum being a curriculum of loss and life, not just loss, not just acknowledging what we've lost, but also living life itself. It's important that we don't just focus on the things that we've lost, but also celebrate and promote, in Smith's words, what we have gained, to balance our perception, to assuage our fears, to alleviate our concerns, to reduce our fright, and to give us a better sense of confidence, enough confidence to move forward with our learning. Promoting can mean celebrating. It can also mean utilizing what has been developed during the lockdowns, during the restrictions. And this really underlines the fact that we all continue to learn. We continue to learn. Even if our learning spaces have changed, even if they've altered in so many ways, we continue to learn. This is the nature of being human. The third and final thought from Karina Smith is that we must provide. Actively carve out space for the necessary conversations about identity, loss, difference, similarity, and fear that will dominate their inner thoughts, the inner space. For some, these thoughts won't be externalized or verbalized unless we make it so. And that is how the healing will begin. Providing means, as Smith says, actively carving out space. Sometimes we fail to do this. Why? Because we are focused on providing the core material for education, the English, the science, the maths that they've lost during this time. And that is, of course, a reasonable worry for teachers. That is, of course, a reasonable concern for educational leaders. What have our learners failed to learn? And so we supply them to help them recover this learning loss. That is very valiant. That is a noble effort. But we forget that before doing that, or whilst doing that, it's important that we also acknowledge other parts of their lives which they have lost. And without actively carving out spaces for that, we will miss that. The Department of Education, for example, in the opening of last school year, allocated or carved out a 1-week period for mental health psychosocial support for students. But that is, although admirable, this was, from my view, inadequate. It's not enough to carve out a week from the months of learning in order to give learners the space to do that. That is, address their psychosocial concerns. This has to happen regularly. This has to happen more inside our virtual classrooms. This has to happen more in our engagements, in our delivery of the modules. One innovative solution that the SLS DB has thought about is to do what they call a school caravan. A school caravan is an expanded form of home visitation, the way I understand it. And in the caravan, what happens is there is an online, a virtual, or a physical visitation that provides and actively carves out this space to allow learners to voice out, to provoke learners to say something, and to promote what is needing and what is warranting celebration. I hope that we have learned something from today's share concerning the altered environments of the teaching and learning spaces that we all occupy. It is important that, again, going back to the thoughts of the recovery curriculum by Carpenter and Carpenter, to make sure that learners are not at a disadvantage, that we provide opportunities and exploration alongside the intensity of our expectations. And the way to do this is to really go back to those 3 P's that Smith talks about: provoking, promoting, and providing, and also to rehumanize our changed or altered learning environments to make sure that our caring and our loving shines through, to lift up our voices and to join in critical and liberating dialogues, to think about what else can we do other than just deliver a module or other than just being virtually present with our classes or with our learners. This is, of course, an open invitation for Mandawi Christian School, for Ibabaw Estancia Elementary School, for St. Louis School of Don Bosco. It's an open and an ongoing invitation to ask ourselves, what can we do to provoke, promote, and provide? How can we show and how can we begin a rehumanization of these cold, barren, lifeless, sometimes anxious spaces? What can we do to join in and voice out, to lift up our voice and to engage in critical and liberating dialogue so that we can find ways to navigate this oppression we are facing from the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic? We end now with some thoughts still from Rainer Rilke's We Move in Infinite Space. The quieter we are, the more patient and open we are in our sadnesses, the more deeply and serenely the new presence can enter us. And the more we can make it our own, the more it becomes our fate. And later on, when it happens, that is, steps forth out of us to other people, we will feel related and close to it in our innermost being. And that is necessary. It is necessary, and toward this point, our development will move little by little, that nothing alien happen to us, but only what has long been our own. People have already had to rethink so many concepts of motion, and they will also gradually come to realize that what we call fate does not come into us from the outside, but emerges from us. It is only because so many people have not absorbed and transformed their fates while they were living in them, that they have not realized what was emerging from them. It was so alien to them that in their confusion and fear, they thought it must have entered them at the very moment they became aware of it. For they swore they had never before found anything like that inside them. Just as people for a long time had a wrong idea about the sun's motion, they are even now wrong about the motion of what is to come. The future stands still, but we move in infinite spaces. Thank you very much to Josh, the clinic manager, who's joined us this morning. We hope that what we have shared today will become useful, not only for the inner and outer spaces that continue to evolve in Ibabaw Estancia Elementary School, in St. Louis School of Don Bosco and Mandawi Christian School, but in all our learning environments. This has been Robbie Chavez, Head of Services at RBE Psychological Services, wishing you well and hoping that we will all become mental health pathfinders. Goodbye.